He risked his life to pull a giant Apache woman from the merciless river, an act of courage no one expected. By morning, the horizon darkens with the arrival of her father and his warriors. The desert trembles as history teeters on the edge, an act of mercy about to collide with the might of an entire army. The sun was bleeding out behind the Red River when the storm came crawling over the plains. The wind tore through the valley like an old ghost remembering where it died, and the smell of rain mixed with dust and sweat and cattle fear. Illy Tanner stood there in the dying light, his coat plastered to his shoulders, eyes fixed on the herd below. He had spent 12 years on this land, building fences with his own hands, burying more dreams than seed. Now the river he trusted turned against him, swollen, snarling, alive with fury. The sky cracked open with a sound that split his bones. Thunder rolled through the canyon like cannon fire, and the first drops hit his face, warm, heavy, relentless. Down below, cattle screamed as the flood rose over their hooves. Illy cursed under his breath, pushing through the mud, boots sinking deep as the world turned to chaos. The Red River, once no wider than a wagon path, now stretched across the valley like a wounded serpent thrashing to free itself. He grabbed a rope from his saddle, tied it around the broken post, and waded in. The current hit him hard, near lifting him off his feet. Cold, wild, angry, the rope strained in his hands as he tried to pull a calf from the swirling water, its eyes wide with blind terror. The river didn't care, it took what it wanted, and in that roaring darkness Illy Tanner saw something impossible, a shape, human, enormous, tangled among roots near the far bend. For a heartbeat he thought it was a fallen tree, but then the lightning came again, white and merciless, and the shape moved, an arm, brown skin marked with blue and black ink, a face half-submerged, hair flowing like night itself. It was a woman. No, something more, towering, powerful, drowning. The river was pulling her under, twisting her against the roots. Illy froze. The storm screamed around him, cattle vanishing into foam, and all he could think was how she didn't belong in this kind of death. He could turn back, he could walk away, but his boots were already moving, his hands were already untying the rope. He plunged into the current again. The cold punched the air from his lungs. The world became water and thunder, and the sound of his own heartbeat fighting to stay steady. He swam, fought, clawed his way toward her, every inch a war against the river's will. The water clawed at his chest, slammed him into debris, filled his mouth with mud and sky. Still, he went on. When he reached her, her eyes were closed. Her lips were pale. She was caught by her wrist under a twisted branch, the current using her as its plaything. He looped the rope around her arm, braced his feet against a rock, and pulled with everything he had left. The storm swallowed his scream. The roots gave way with a crack like breaking bones. The current almost took them both. She was heavy, too heavy. Her body drifted against him like the trunk of a fallen tree. He dragged her toward the shallows, step by bloody step, until his knees hit gravel and the river's voice turned to a whisper. He collapsed beside her, gasping, coughing up river water that tasted of earth and iron. She lay motionless, her chest still. Rain poured over her face, washing blood from a cut above her brow. Lightning flashed again, revealing her size. Nearly 7 feet of muscle and bone, skin painted in the old ways. Illy leaned close, no breath, no sound, just the storm and his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. He pressed both hands to her chest and started again, hard, desperate, the way a man fights for his own life through another's body. He shouted through the rain, voice breaking with exhaustion and fury, "Come on, girl, come back." Nothing, then. Her body jerked. A deep gasp tore from her throat, followed by a violent cough that sent water spilling from her lips. Her eyes flew open, dark, sharp, alive. Illy stumbled back. Those eyes caught the lightning. For a moment, it was as if the storm itself had found form in her gaze. She looked at him, not with fear, not with thanks, but with something ancient and unreadable. He took a step back, trembling. She blinked slowly, then fell into unconsciousness again. Illy stood in the rain, staring down at her, breath coming in broken gasps. The river had quieted some, its fury spent. The flood still raged in the distance, but here it was only the sound of rain on stone, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, and the thundering confusion in his chest. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what tribe marked her skin or what stories lay behind those scars. But he knew one thing. The river had offered him a choice tonight, to save or to walk away, and he had chosen to save. He tied the rope once more, this time around her arm, and began dragging her toward the ridge where his horse waited. The rain blurred everything, turning the land to smoke and silver. His boots slipped, his muscles burned, but he kept going. The wind howled, the world faded to gray, and still he pulled her body through the mud like a promise he didn't understand. Behind them, the Red River rolled on, carrying away the cattle, the fences, the past. Ahead waited the cabin light, faint, trembling, human, and between those two worlds, a man and a giant woman, both half. Dead, bound now by something neither could yet name. The rain did not stop through the night. It came down steady and cold, hissing against the roof of Illy Tanner's cabin like the voice of some unseen god whispering judgment. Inside, a single lantern flickered against the walls, throwing long, restless shadows over the rough, hewn boards. The smell of wet wood and smoke filled the air. Illy dragged the giant woman across the threshold, mud streaking the floor, his arms trembling from exhaustion. He laid her near the hearth where the fire burned low, and for the first time he saw the full weight of what he'd done. She was enormous, broad-shouldered, tall even while lying down, her muscles carved like stone beneath torn leather. Her wrists bore scars like bracelets of fire. Her neck was marked with black lines that spiraled like rivers around her collarbone. He stood there for a moment, just breathing, watching the firelight crawl over her face. The storm outside moaned through the cracks of the door, and somewhere far away a coyote answered. Illy knelt beside her, his fingers trembling as he reached for the blanket on his cot. He wrapped it around her shoulders. Her skin was cold, colder than death should feel. He stared at her hand resting heavy on the floor, big enough to wrap around his wrist twice. It wasn't fear that settled in his gut. It was awe. He stoked the fire higher, feeding it with dry wood until it cracked and spat sparks like tiny suns. Then he poured whiskey from the tin flask, pressed it to her lips. She didn't move. He tried again, slow, careful. A faint twitch in her throat, a breath that trembled against the rim. "Easy now," he murmured, though she could not hear. "You ain't dyin' on me after all that." The storm kept its rhythm, drumming steady on the roof. Illy sat beside her, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. He could feel every bruise on his body, every muscle screaming. He thought about letting her go when dawn came, ride her to the trading post, hand her to whoever would take her. But the thought didn't sit right, not with the way she looked lying there, caught between this world and another. He leaned back, listening to the wind shift. Something about her face, the high cheekbones, the faint scar running through her brows, stirred an old memory. The night his ranch burned years ago, the cries, the smoke, the shadow of a tall figure standing against the flames. He shook it off. The past was another storm he'd already drowned in once. Hours passed. The fire burned low again, then a sound, a breath, deep and ragged. Her chest rose, fell, her fingers twitched, Illy straightened, heart pounding. She turned her head slightly, lips parting, eyes still closed. A whisper escaped her mouth, a language he didn't know, soft and guttural, rolling like the river itself. He leaned closer, not to understand, but to hear the life in it. The cadence of it carried weight. Something sacred, older than English, older than fences and guns. Her eyes opened suddenly. Illy froze. The firelight caught them again. Dark, endless, alive. For a moment, they seemed to look through him, not at him. Then her body tensed. Her breath came in sharp bursts. She tried to rise, but the pain struck hard. "Easy," he said, lifting his hands in calm. "You're safe. The river's gone. You're safe now." She didn't understand the words, but something in his tone stopped her from striking. She fell back against the blanket, her chest rising fast. Her eyes darted around the cabin, wild and searching. He gestured toward the fire, toward the roof. "You're at my place. Storm took you. I pulled you out." No answer. Just that stare, long and unblinking. Then her head turned toward the window, where lightning flashed faintly in the distance. She whispered again. One word, low and heavy, almost like a name. Illy poured water from the kettle into a tin cup and offered it. She didn't move, so he set it near her hand and backed away. Her gaze followed him like a hawk's. Finally, she reached out, slow, deliberate, and took the cup. The cup looked like a child's toy in her grasp. She drank, then let the metal fall to the floor. He exhaled. His body felt like a crumbling wall ready to give way. He wanted to ask who she was, where she came from, what business she had near his land, but the words died before leaving his mouth. Something in her presence made talk feel small. She drifted back into sleep soon after, her breathing deep and steady now. Illy sat in his chair, watching the storm fade beyond the window. Outside, the Red River had quieted to a low growl, still swollen but retreating into its banks. The cattle were gone, maybe dead, the fences too. He'd lost near everything that night. Yet, somehow, it didn't feel like loss, not completely. He turned to her again. Her face was calm now, almost peaceful beneath the glow. The scars seemed to soften in the light, the tension in her shoulders easing. She looked less like a giant warrior and more like someone who had carried the weight of the world too long. Illy's eyes grew heavy. The rain slowed to a whisper. The fire cracked softly. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him, and let his body drift toward sleep. The last thing he heard before the dark took him was her voice, a murmur from the other side of dreams, steady as the river itself. Words he couldn't understand, but they carried a promise, or maybe a warning. When the dawn came, it found 2 survivors in that lonely cabin. 1 man, 1 woman, and the ghost of a river still running between them. The storm left before sunrise, slipping quietly into the hills as if ashamed of its fury. The sky hung pale and heavy, clouds torn open to reveal a weak, bruised light. The land smelled of wet earth and ashes. The Red River, once raging, now moved slow and swollen, a beast tamed but not forgiven. Inside the cabin, the fire had died to a whisper. Only thin threads of smoke curled upward through the chimney. Illy Tanner sat slumped in his chair, half awake, half dreaming, a blanket draped across his shoulders. His eyes burned from the night's battle, but the sound that pulled him from sleep was not thunder, it was breathing. Deep, rhythmic, human, he looked toward the hearth. She was awake. The woman lay still, her head turned slightly toward the light creeping through the cracks in the wall. Her eyes were open, watching the ceiling as though trying to make sense of its shape. The fire's faint glow brushed her face-high cheekbones, a scar across her lip, skin the color of copper kissed by dawn. She looked less like something from legend now and more like someone caught between worlds. Illy straightened slowly, careful not to startle her. His voice came low, cautious. "Morning, ma'am." No answer. Her eyes moved toward him, calm but unreadable. He stood, poured water into a tin cup, and set it near her again. She didn't touch it. Instead, she looked at the steam rising from the cup, then at him studying his every move. "You're safe here," he said, his tone rough but gentle. "Storm's gone, you'll be all right." Still silence. The only sound was the slow creak of the roof settling after the rain. Illy ran a hand through his hair, uneasy. He had known silence before, the kind that came after gunfire, after funerals, after loss, but this was different. This was living silence, the kind that breathed and judged. He walked toward the stove, broke apart a loaf of bread and laid a piece near her. She followed him with her eyes unblinking. Finally, she spoke one word, low and harsh. It rolled through the air like a drumbeat. He didn't know what it meant, but the tone was sharp, commanding. Illy froze. "Don't rightly know what you're sayin', miss, but you're welcome to rest here till you're fit to travel." She tried to rise, her arm trembling. Pain cut through her body like fire. She winced, teeth gritted. Illy moved forward instinctively. Easy now. Her hand flashed up fast as a striking snake. It caught his wrist before he touched her. Her grip was iron. Her eyes burned with warning. They stayed locked that way for a breathless second. Then her strength failed her, and she released him, collapsing back with a groan. Illy stepped away, rubbing his wrist. A faint smile ghosted across his tired face. "All right," he muttered. "Still got some fight in you." He walked to the door, pushed it open. The morning air rushed in cold and clean, carrying the scent of river mud and sage. The land outside was a graveyard of what the storm left behind, fences broken, tracks washed away, a few dead cattle half buried in silt. His ranch, what was left of it, stood like a scar against the valley. He leaned against the frame, watching the light change, listening to the soft trickle of water retreating back to the riverbed. He'd seen loss before, but this felt different. Not like punishment, more like a beginning he hadn't asked for. Behind him, the sound of movement, a faint rustle. He turned. She had sat up now, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her eyes roamed the cabin, scanning every object, the rifle over the mantel, the shelves of tools, the faded photograph of a woman long gone. Illy felt something shift in the air, a tension that wasn't fear but memory. She pointed toward the rifle, then toward him, a question without words. He hesitated, then nodded. "Mine, just for huntin'." She stared at him a long moment, her jaw tight, then looked away. He wanted to ask her name, where she came from, what the river had done to bring her to him, but something told him not to rush it. Some stories needed silence before they could be spoken. He poured coffee into his own cup, the steam rising between them like a thin fog. He sat across from her by the fire. "You hungry?" he asked. "Got bread, some dried venison if you can chew it." No reply, but she reached for the bread slow, cautious, and tore off a piece. The motion was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though she were tasting something forbidden. Illy watched her eat, the smallest spark of relief flickering in his chest. For the first time since the storm, the cabin didn't feel haunted. Outside, the clouds began to break apart. Thin stripes of sunlight crawled across the wet ground, turning the puddles to mirrors. She glanced toward the window, eyes softening for just a breath. There was something in that gaze, not gratitude, not yet, but a fragile calm, like she recognized the light. Illy followed her stare and whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "World's still turnin' after all." He didn't see her look at him then, a quiet, searching look, like a question forming behind her eyes. The storm had passed, the flood had taken much, but it had also brought something strange, something alive. And though neither of them knew it yet, the silence between them was not emptiness. It was the beginning of something that would soon shake the valley to its roots. The night had folded itself over the plains, but the rancher's heart refused to rest. He sat by the dying embers of his small campfire, the crackle of the wood mixing with the steady song of the crickets. His hat tilted low, eyes heavy, yet his mind was sharp, replaying the day, the river, and the woman he had saved. In the distance, the red river whispered its endless tune, the same current that had nearly claimed her life. He stared toward it, wondering who she really was, and why the memory of her face refused to leave him. There was something unspoken in her eyes, gratitude, yes, but also warning. A coyote howled somewhere in the hills. The horse shifted restlessly. He felt it too, that strange pulse in the wind that told of unseen riders moving under the moon. Out here, the land had its own kind of heartbeat, and tonight it was uneven. He took his rifle and stood, scanning the dark ridge line. Nothing moved, but he'd been on the frontier long enough to know when eyes were watching. He could almost feel them, quiet, cautious, measuring him. The Apache woman slept inside his barn, wrapped in one of his old blankets. She hadn't spoken much, just enough to thank him before exhaustion took her. He didn't even know her name, yet the way she'd looked at him before closing her eyes, it wasn't the look of a stranger. It was trust, deep and rare, born from survival. He turned back toward the fire, tossed another log in, and sat down again. His dog, an old cattle hound named Briscoe, lifted its head and gave a low growl. The rancher hushed him softly, but his own pulse quickened. The dog didn't growl at shadows. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement between the mesquite trees. One figure, tall, silent, moving like smoke through the moonlight. Another, and then another. They weren't settlers. The way they carried themselves, straight, backed, deliberate, told him all he needed to know. Apaches. He rose slowly, hands away from his gun, keeping calm. The first rider emerged from the shadows, his horse moving in quiet grace. The man wore the markings of a warrior, feathers braided into long dark hair, a necklace of bone and turquoise. His eyes burned with calm fire. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the wind slipping through the dry grass. Then the warrior spoke in broken English, low and cold. "You save woman." The rancher nodded once. "Yes, pulled her out of the river before she drowned." The warrior looked toward the barn. "She is my daughter." The words struck like a hammer. The rancher felt the weight of them settle in his chest. "Daughter." Before he could answer, more riders appeared behind the warrior, 10, 20, maybe more, moving silently, surrounding the ranch, their horses standing like statues in the moonlight. Each man armed with bow or rifle, each watching him with the same hard stare. The warrior dismounted, stepping closer. "My name is Nate. You save her, you have our thanks." His tone shifted, quiet but sharp. "But now, we must take her home." The rancher hesitated, glancing toward the barn. "She's weak, needs another night's rest." Nate's jaw tightened. "Our ways do not wait." For a moment, the two men stood locked in silence, two worlds meeting in the dim light of the fire, one bound by duty, the other by mercy. The rancher saw the pride in Nate's eyes, but also the pain, the fear of a father nearly losing his child. He stepped aside slowly, nodding once. "Then take her home." Nate gave a short command in Apache, and two riders moved toward the barn. The woman appeared moments later, supported gently between them. She looked fragile, pale under the moonlight, but her eyes found the rancher's and held them with quiet meaning. She whispered something to her father. He listened, turned back, and nodded to the rancher. "She says you have a brave heart. She says you saved her life when the river wanted her soul." The rancher said nothing. He just tipped his hat slightly, as if to honor her words. Nate extended his hand, a gesture of respect rare between his people and white men. "You have our debt. The Apache do not forget." And then, as quietly as they came, the riders turned and vanished into the silver, dark night, leaving only hoof prints in the dust and the whisper of the wind over the grass. The rancher stood there long after they were gone, the fire now only embers, the dog curled at his boots. He felt the stillness of the land return, but something inside him had changed. He had saved a life, but out here, every act of mercy had a cost, and he could feel that the cost of this one hadn't yet been paid. Morning came with a silence that felt unnatural. The sun rose slowly over the ridges, painting the horizon in muted gold, but the rancher's land remained still, too still. Even the birds seemed cautious, their songs distant, as though they knew something the world had yet to say. He stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, staring toward the wide plains. The ashes from last night's fire had cooled, and the only sign of what happened were the faint tracks of horse hooves leading away from his property. It almost felt like a dream, the woman, the riders, their silent departure except for the empty blanket folded neatly on the bench. She'd left it behind, as if to remind him it was all real. He rubbed his beard, uneasy. The Apache didn't visit white ranchers, not without reason. Saving one of their own might have earned their gratitude or their suspicion, and both were dangerous in different ways. Briscoe trotted ahead of him, sniffing at the dust. The dog's tail wagged, then stiffened. He began to growl again, low and cautious. The rancher frowned. "What is it, boy?" A flicker of light caught his eye, something small, half buried near the barn door. He crouched, brushed the dirt aside, and found a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, bound in rawhide and carved with tribal markings. It wasn't something a warrior would drop carelessly. It looked old. Sacred, maybe. He turned it over in his palm, feeling the etching under his thumb. A woman's pendant, her pendant. Guess she left something behind. He muttered, pocketing it gently. As he walked back toward the porch, he noticed dust stirring far on the horizon. A small cloud, riders again, heading his way. He squinted, heart tightening, but these weren't Apache. Too organized, too slow. Then he saw the gleam of a badge. 2 men on horseback, both in worn coats, rode up to his gate. One of them, tall, sharp, featured, with eyes that missed nothing, was Sheriff Harlan Boyd. The other, a deputy barely out of his 20s, kept glancing around like he expected arrows to come flying out of the sagebrush. "Morning, Jake," the sheriff said, reining in his horse. "Heard you had some excitement out here last night." The rancher leaned against a post, calm but cautious. "You been listenin' to the wind again, Harlan?" Boyd gave a humorless smile. "Word travels. Folks down by the trading post say a band of Apaches passed through before dawn, headed east. That true?" Jake nodded once. "Could be. You see 'em?" He hesitated. "Saw riders. Didn't count 'em. They didn't cause trouble." The deputy shifted in his saddle. "They ever do." The sheriff shot him a look, then turned back to Jake. "You're a hard man to read, friend. I've known you 5 years, and you've never had company like that. You wanna tell me what's going on?" Jake sipped his coffee, eyes steady. "Found someone in the river yesterday, nearly drowned. Turned out she wasn't alone. Her people came for her last night." The deputy whistled under his breath. "You saved an Apache?" Jake didn't answer. Boyd's expression hardened. "You know what that means, don't you? Army's been watchin' that valley. One wrong step and they'll think you're harborin' hostiles." "I wasn't harborin' anyone. I was helpin' a dyin' woman," Jake said quietly. Boyd studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You always were too decent for your own good. Just be careful. The army boys ain't as forgiving. If they think you're mixin' with the tribes, they'll come lookin' for answers." Jake nodded, his jaw set. "They'll find I got none worth tackin'." The sheriff tipped his hat. "For your sake, I hope that's true." He turned his horse, pausing once more. "You ever hear the name Nate again? Best you forget it. That man's the son of the old chief. He's dangerous proud, and if he thinks you owe him or he owes you, either way, it ends in blood." With that, the 2 riders headed off toward the ridge, leaving Jake alone again in the dust. He watched them disappear, then turned back to the barn. His gaze fell on the faint boot prints by the door, smaller than his own, barely visible now. He thought of her again, the way she'd looked back at him before leaving, the way her father had spoken of debts and honor. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the silver pendant, and turned it once more in the sunlight. It glimmered faintly, a fragile reminder that kindness on the frontier never stayed simple for long. The wind picked up, warm and dry, brushing against his face. Somewhere out there beyond the ridges the Apache were moving, and deep down he knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The day rolled on heavy and slow, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the grass. Jake worked the fence line, mending the wire, trying to lose himself in the rhythm of work, but every hammer strike only echoed the same thought in his head. That pendant, that girl, that look in her eyes before she rode away. He stopped to wipe the sweat from his brow, leaning against a post. The land stretched endless in every direction, a sea of yellow grass and red stone, quiet and cruelly beautiful. It had always been his peace. But now it felt different, haunted almost. As the sun dipped low, he saddled his horse. Something in him needed to see the river again. The ride was quiet, save for the creak of leather and the horse's steady breath. When he reached the riverbank, the water was calm, but the marks of struggle were still there, the broken reeds, the drag lines in the mud, the place where she'd fallen in. He knelt, ran his fingers through the damp earth, and thought about how close she'd come to dying. He pulled the pendant from his pocket, holding it up against the last light of the sun. Its silver edge caught the fire of dusk, flashing like a signal. "I reckon this belongs to you." He murmured to no one wherever you are. The sound of hooves snapped him out of thought. He turned fast, hand near his gun, but the rider coming down the ridge wasn't Apache, it was a man he knew too well. Illy Carter, traitor, informant, and trouble in human form. Well, I'll be, Illy called as he reined in his horse beside him. Didn't think I'd find you out here talkin' to the wind. Jake's voice stayed even, ain't talkin', just listenin'. Illy chuckled, dismounting. Same thing, far as I can tell. Heard you had some company last night, painted warriors ridden through your place like ghosts. Jake gave no reply. Illy smirked. Don't bother denyin' it. Word's already spread from Fort Granger to the post road. They say you pulled an Apache out of the river. Brave or foolish, can't decide which. Jake turned his eyes on him. Why you here, Illy? Because I smell opportunity, Illy said, his grin fading into something colder. The Army's payin' for any information on Apache movement. You tell me what you saw, I tell them. We both walk away richer. Jake's tone was flat. I don't sell people out, Illy. Illy tilted his head. Even when those people might bring a war down on your land, I heard the name Nate whispered at the post. You know who that is, that's blood of Kochais himself. You save his daughter, he'll think you're bound to him now. The Army hears that they'll burn your ranch to the ground just to be sure. Jake said nothing, his jaw tightening. Illy stepped closer, voice low and slick. Think about it, friend. You're out here alone. No family, no backup, no law to protect you. You give me the truth. I give you enough gold to buy a fresh start somewhere safe. Jake turned away. You done talkin'? Illy smirked. You'll regret this, Jake. Kindness don't keep you alive out here. He swung onto his horse and rode off, his laughter fading into the wind. The rancher stood by the river a long while after he was gone, the silence pressing heavier than before. He tossed the pendant once in his hand, then slipped it back into his pocket. Maybe not, he whispered, but it sure as hell makes a man worth somethin'. As he mounted his horse and turned toward home, the last light of the sun died behind the hills. Far out across the plains, faint and distant, a single column of smoke rose into the darkening sky. He watched it for a long time, uneasy. That wasn't a campfire, it was a signal, and deep down he knew it was meant for him. The first gray of dawn crept across the valley, soft as breath, cold as judgment. Mist coiled along the riverbed where the flood had finally calmed, the water whispering over stones as if it remembered what it had taken. Jake Tanner rose before the sun, the same way he always had, but this morning the silence felt wrong, too deep, too still, like the world was holding its breath. He stepped outside, boots sinking in wet clay, and looked toward the corral. Empty, the horses were restless through the night. He'd heard them kicking, snorting, but now they stood like statues. Even the wind refused to move. Something inside him tightened. He went back inside, to the cot by the fire where Naya had been sleeping. The blanket lay folded, the lantern cold. Her tracks, faint but certain, led out the door. Jake's chest went hollow. She was gone. He grabbed his rifle and hat, the motions quiet but sharp, and followed the prints through the dew. They wound through the grass, light but deliberate, heading toward the ridge where dawn was breaking pale and uncertain. The air smelled of sage and wet stone. The sun had yet to climb, but already its light licked at the edges of the world, soft gold over the distant mesas. He followed faster now, breath turning white in the cool. He found her at last on the river's edge, kneeling in the shallows, washing her hands as though trying to cleanse something deeper than blood. Her long hair hung soaked and dark against her back, her broad shoulders rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. He stopped a few paces away. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said quietly. She didn't turn. I was born alone. The earth is my mother, the river my brother. You forget, white man, this land does not belong to you. Her voice carried no anger, just truth, heavy as stone. Jake let the silence breathe between them before answering. Maybe not, but neither of us has much of it left if we keep temptin' fate this way. Nair rose, turning at last. The first light struck her face, calm, fierce, unreadable. "You fear what follows me. I fear what hunts you," he replied. She looked beyond him, toward the ridge. "Then your fear is already here." Jake turned, eyes narrowing. Shapes moved in the fog, faint at first, then sharp. Riders, half a dozen, painted faces, rifles slung low. Apache scouts. He raised his rifle by instinct but froze when Naya lifted her hand. "No," she said, her tone sudden, commanding. "They are mine." The riders fanned out, circling them slow, hooves muffled in the wet earth. One of them tall, broad, scarred down the cheek, dismounted and approached. His gaze cut straight through Jake, full of suspicion and scorn. He barked words in Apache, and Naya answered, her voice firm, controlled. The exchange was fast, sharp as a duel, and Jake caught only fragments: his name, the river, the word for captive. The scarred warrior's hand went to his knife. Naya stepped between them, palm raised, shouting something fierce and final. The air trembled with her defiance. Then the man spat at the ground and pointed at Jake. She turned back to him. "They think you took me prisoner." Jake's voice dropped low. "Then tell him the truth." "They don't listen to truth," she said. "They listen to blood." He saw it in her eyes, the conflict, the weight of loyalty and gratitude warring inside her. The fog thickened, the river murmuring like a warning. One of the scouts raised his rifle toward Jake. Another urged his horse forward. Jake steadied his breath. "You'd best tell him to stop, Naya." "I cannot," she said softly, "not until my father comes." "Your father, Grey Hawk," she answered, the name falling like thunder. Jake felt the world tilt, the name known across the frontier, whispered in camps and forts alike. A war chief of legend, the man who once halted an entire regiment with 50 riders and a single word. And he had just saved his daughter from drowning. The scout lunged, grabbing Jake's arm, but Jake moved faster. The rifle butt came up hard under the man's chin, dropping him to his knees. The others shouted, chaos breaking loose in a storm of echoing cries. Horses reared, water splashed. Naya shouted for calm, but the noise drowned her out. Jake backed toward the rocks, rifle ready, breath sharp as glass. Then Naya did something no one expected. She turned her blade on her own men. "Enough," she cried, her voice ringing through the canyon like steel on stone. "He is not your enemy." The riders froze, her eyes locked on Jake. "Go," she whispered, "before they remember who they serve." He hesitated, torn between logic and loyalty. "Now," she said again, voice breaking slightly, "please." Jake turned and ran, boots pounding the wet ground, the roar of the river chasing him as the first full light of dawn broke over the world. Behind him he heard Naya's voice rise again, strong, defiant, holding back the fury of her own blood. And as he climbed the ridge and looked back one last time, he saw her standing in the river, tall as a statue, surrounded by men who no longer knew whether to obey her or fear her. The morning sun burned red above them, and Jake Tanner knew his life had just changed forever. The sun rose slow, bleeding across the sky like a wound reopening. Jake rode hard through the grasslands, the rhythm of his horse matching the hammering in his chest. The ridge fell away behind him, but the sight of Naya standing against her own kin burned in his mind like a scar that would never heal. He slowed only when the land leveled out again, his ranch in sight, smoke still curling from the blackened remains of the north barn. The storm had torn part of the roof away last night, and now the wind played through the broken boards like a whistle of mourning. He dismounted, walked past the corral, and looked back toward the hills. The valley seemed too quiet, not peace waiting. He poured water from the trough over his head, trying to wash the river, the blood, and the guilt away, but the images wouldn't fade. Her eyes, dark and solemn, the way she said his name, the fear she carried like armor. Inside the cabin the fire was cold. He lit a match and set it to the lamp, the faint light flickering over the wooden walls. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind made him reach for the rifle leaning against the doorframe. He sat at the table, rubbing his temples until a sound outside froze him. Hooves again, slow and deliberate. He took the rifle and stepped into the sunlight. Nair rode toward him, alone this time, Her horse was dark, her face unreadable. She dismounted without a word. The silence between them was thicker than the heat. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. She looked past him to the barn, to the open land beyond. "I had no choice." Jake's voice was low, strained. "Your men were ready to kill me. They still might," she answered, "but I needed to warn you first." "Warn me," her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Broken Crow rides south. He blames you for what happened. He says your hands touched the blood of the chief's daughter. In his eyes, that's reason enough for war." Jake lowered the rifle slightly. "And your father, what does he say?" Her expression softened, just enough for the wind to slip through the gap. "My father listens to no one until he sees the truth with his own eyes. He comes at dawn, with all his warriors." Jake stared, the words heavy in the air between them. "You mean to say, he's common here?" "Yes." He stepped back, eyes searching hers for any hint of deceit. "Then I suppose I'll have guests to prepare for." "You don't understand," she said. "He comes not as a guest, but as judgment." Jake's voice stayed steady, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. "And what will he find when he gets here?" She met his gaze fully. "A man who saved his daughter, or a man who trespassed against his people? I do not know which he will choose to see." The silence stretched until even the cicadas stopped their song. Finally, Jake spoke. "If I'd let you drown, maybe I'd be sleep, and easier tonight." Her answer came soft but certain. "If you'd let me drown, you would have killed what's left of your soul." He didn't look away. "And what about yours?" She turned then, walking a few paces toward the river road. "Mine belongs to my people, but my heart does not listen as it should." The words hung between them, fragile, dangerous. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and distant. Jake felt something shift inside him, not love, not yet, but the first tremor of it. That dangerous mercy that makes a man forget the lines the world drew for him. He set the rifle down slowly, the gesture of surrender not to her, but to whatever fate waited beyond the next sunrise. Nea watched him, her eyes flickering between strength and sorrow. "When my father arrives, you must not raise your gun. If you do, no word, no truth will save you." "Then I won't," Jake said, "but if any man rides to burn this land again, I'll die standin' on it." She nodded once, the kind of nod only warriors shared. Then she mounted her horse, reins drawn tight. "The dawn will bring them," she said. "Be ready." And with that she rode off into the open light, her figure shrinking against the rising sun until she was no more than a shadow on the horizon. Jake stood there long after she was gone, staring at the dust she left behind. The world around him seemed to hold its breath once more. Even the river had gone silent, as if waiting for the thunder of 1,000 hooves that were already on their way. The first light of dawn cracked over the desert horizon, spilling gold and crimson across the land. Dust hung in the air like ghostly mist as Ethan saddled his weary horse outside the Apache camp. Behind him, the morning drums faded into silence, replaced by a deep stillness that only came after a storm of danger had passed. Naili, her tall frame wrapped in a new woven shawl of her people, stood near the fire. Her dark eyes followed him, calm but heavy with unspoken words. "You ride alone again," she said softly. "The plains will remember that." Ethan smiled faintly, tightening the leather strap across his saddle. "Reckon they remember a lot of men who came through these lands. Most ain't worth rememberin'." She stepped closer, the firelight reflected in her eyes. "But you are different. You risked your life for one you did not know." Ethan's hand paused on the reins. "You'd have done the same, princess. Just happened to be my river that day." A brief silence lingered between them, the kind that stretches like a slow-moving river. Then Naili reached into a small pouch tied at her waist and drew out a carved stone pendant, an eagle with wings spread wide. "My father says it belongs to men who carry the spirit of freedom," she said, pressing it into his palm. "He wished to give it himself, but his pride is heavier than a mountain." Ethan looked down at the carving, tracing the ridges of its wings. "I'll carry it, if only to remember a people who still know what freedom means." Their eyes met again, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the boundary between their worlds, rancher and warrior, cowboy and princess, dissolved into something timeless. Behind her, a small group of Apache riders began gathering, their silhouettes rising against the dawn. It was time. Ethan swung into his saddle. You tell your father. His warriors ride truer than most soldiers I've seen. Naley nodded. And you tell your people, the desert does not forget kindness. He tipped his hat, a quiet gesture of respect that said more than words ever could. Then with a light tug on the reins, his horse began the long trek back toward the western hills, each hoofbeat echoing softly in the morning calm. The wind picked up, carrying the faint call of an eagle somewhere overhead. Ethan looked up, and for a moment he thought he saw its wings outstretched, circling high over the canyon, watching him ride away. He touched the pendant hanging around his neck, and a faint smile crossed his face. The West was still wild, still unforgiving, but somehow, in its vast loneliness, Ethan felt a strange peace, the kind that comes only after standing on the edge of life and walking away with honor still intact. And though the desert behind him grew small and distant, he knew somewhere in that wilderness a pair of eyes were still watching, still remembering the cowboy who pulled a princess from the river. The sun was climbing high when Ethan rode back into Dust Creek, a one-street town half, buried in the heart of nowhere. The wind carried sand and rumor in equal measure, and today both seemed to stir as soon as folks spotted him. He looked like a ghost risen out of the desert, clothes torn, hat coated in dust, and a streak of dried blood still running down his sleeve. His horse stumbled with exhaustion, nostrils flaring, but Ethan didn't stop till he reached the watering trough outside Fletcher's saloon. The piano inside went silent, chairs creaked, boots shuffled. Every eye turned toward him through the saloon doors as he swung down from his horse. "Hell, Ethan," came the barkeep's voice, a heavy man named Fletcher wiping a glass with a rag that had seen better days. "Thought you was vulture bones by now." Ethan didn't answer right away. He brushed the dust off his coat, walked up to the bar, and poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher. He drank it slow, steady. "Almost was," he finally said. "River tried to take me. Apache country." At that word Apache, the whole room went tight. A card dealer froze mid-shuffle. A cattleman at the far table spat tobacco into a tin, his brow darkening. "You goin' near their land, cowboy," one of the ranch hands muttered. "Ain't no white man comes back from there." Ethan turned, eyes cool as winter steel. "Then I reckon I didn't get the message." A few uneasy laughs rippled through the crowd, but it didn't ease the tension. Dust Creek had long memories, too many raids, too many graves. The Apache were still ghosts in their stories. Fletcher leaned in close. "Words travelin', Ethan. Some folks say the Apache were ridden close last night. 200 strong, maybe more." Ethan nodded. "They were." The glass in Fletcher's hand nearly slipped. "And you're sittin' here breathin'. Guess kindness don't always ride with a gun," Ethan said quietly. He reached into his pocket and set the eagle pendant on the bar. The carved stone glimmered faintly under the saloon light. A hush fell. "What's that?" someone whispered. "A gift," Ethan said. "From the ones you think don't know mercy." The barkeep's face softened, but the others didn't know what to make of it. To them, the Apache were still shadows on the horizon, not people who gave gifts. Fletcher finally sighed. "Well, hell, you always did walk where the rest of us wouldn't." Ethan took the pendant back, slipping it around his neck. "Some things you just find out by fallin' in the river, Fletcher." As he turned to leave, the piano started playing again, slow and uncertain, like the first light after a storm. He pushed open the swinging doors, stepped into the hot sunlight, and mounted his horse. Behind him, whispers rose again in the saloon of the cowboy who went into Apache land and came back with a gift instead of a bullet. But Ethan didn't hear them. He was already riding toward the horizon, where the land shimmered and the desert wind carried only the sound of his horse's hooves. Above, the eagle circled once more, watching, remembering. The heat in Dust Creek had turned the ground into cracked leather, and the town itself seemed to creak beneath the weight of rumors. Words spread faster than the wind, the kind that burned your throat and carried half truths from porch to porch. By the time Ethan rode down the main street the next morning, the whispers had already grown teeth. Men leaned on railings, their eyes following him, voices low but sharp. "Apache Mark, I tell you," one muttered, "saw it myself hangin' round his neck. Could be he's sellin' us out," another said. Why else come back alive? Ethan didn't bother answering the stares. He'd learned long ago that silence had more strength than shouting. But when he saw Sheriff Tully standing outside his office, arms folded, jaw tight, he knew the silence wouldn't last long. Tully was a thick man with a square face carved by years of desert wind. His badge had seen more blood than polish, and his eyes carried the look of a man who trusted few and forgave fewer. "Ethan," the sheriff called, voice cutting through the dry air. "Step inside." Ethan swung down from his horse and followed him into the dim, cool office. The door shut behind them with a soft thud that sounded almost final. Tully circled behind his desk and dropped a folded piece of parchment on it. "That came from Fort McCall this morning," he said. "U.S. cavalry's reporting Apache movement near the Red River. 200 riders, maybe more." Ethan's gaze didn't flinch. "I saw him." "Yeah," Tully said, his voice flattening. "That's what folks been sayin'. You rode right into Apache country. You come back alive. Now we got word their war chief's daughter was seen near the river too. You wanna tell me what the hell's going on?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't one for long stories, especially when they could get twisted into nooses. "I pulled someone from the water, Sheriff, that's all." "Someone," Tully repeated. "Or something." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You know how much blood's been spilled between them and this town. You think you can just waltz into their land and play hero?" Ethan met his stare, calm and cold. "Didn't do it for a headline. Did it because she was drowning." The sheriff studied him for a long, silent beat, the only sound being the lazy tick of the wall clock. Then he grunted and leaned back. "Don't expect folks here to see it that way. They're scared, Ethan. Scared folks do stupid things. Keep your head low, you hear me?" Ethan nodded once and turned toward the door. But before he could step out, Tully said quietly, "And if those Apache ride into Dust Creek, I'll have no choice but to call the fort. Don't give me a reason to think you brought him here." Ethan paused at the threshold, the sunlight slicing across half his face. "If they come, Sheriff, it won't be for war, not yet." And with that he stepped outside. The street was still, almost waiting. Above him, a hawk circled same wide wings, same lonely sky. Ethan untied his horse, mounted up, and rode toward the edge of town, where the land opened into wild country. Somewhere out there, between the red cliffs and the whispering wind, he knew the girl's people were watching, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this uneasy peace, this thin thread between kindness and danger, was about to snap. By late afternoon, the desert sky turned the color of copper fire, and the wind began to stir with that same restless whisper that always came before something changed. Ethan had ridden miles out of Dust Creek, far enough that the town was nothing but a smudge behind him. He stopped at a rise overlooking the Red River, the same place where it all began. The water below shimmered like glass, quiet and deceptive, carrying no trace of the struggle that had nearly taken both their lives. Ethan dismounted, letting his horse graze among the brittle grass. He stood still for a long while, watching the horizon. The pendant around his neck caught the dying sunlight, its carved eagle reflecting a faint red glow. He could feel them before he saw them. The air changed, the quiet grew heavier, sharper. Then came the soft thud of hooves, barely audible at first, then many, riding in perfect rhythm. From the line of distant hills 5 Apache riders appeared, their silhouettes cutting clean against the orange sky. They approached slow, steady, with the kind of calm that came from knowing the land better than any map ever drawn. Ethan didn't move, he waited. The lead rider dismounted, a tall man with braided hair, a chest marked with white paint, and eyes that carried the weight of command. His presence was calm, but his gaze could cut stone. Behind him rode Naomi, her arms still bandaged, her expression unreadable. Ethan's throat tightened, not from fear, but from the strange gravity between them. She stood beside her father, the war chief Taza, the man who led 200 warriors, and whose word was law across the valley. Taza studied Ethan in silence. The wind moved around them, carrying no sound but the rustle of leather and the creak of saddles. Then, in a voice deep and sure, the chief spoke. "You pulled my daughter from the river." Ethan nodded once. She would have drowned. Taza's eyes flickered not with gratitude, but with something more complex, something between duty and pride. "A man who saves life carries the spirit of that life with him," he said, "but a man who crosses into our lands without leave carries a shadow." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't come to take anything. I came because it was right." Taza's lips pressed tight. For a long breath nothing moved. Then Nayli stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, carried across the wind. "He speaks truth, father. He saved me when the river tried to claim me. He asked for nothing." The chief's expression barely shifted, but his eyes lingered on his daughter, and something in his stance eased. He turned back to Ethan. "The land remembers every act, good or bad. You are still a stranger, cowboy, but the river tells your story. For now, that is enough." He motioned for one of his men, who stepped forward holding a small bundle wrapped in deer hide. The man placed it on the ground between them. Taza said, "This is for you, a sign that your hands brought life, not death." Ethan crouched, unwrapped the bundle, and found inside a knife carved from obsidian, its handle etched with the same eagle that hung from his neck. He rose, meeting the chief's gaze. "I'll honor it." Taza gave a small nod. "Then ride careful, Ethan Walker. There are men with white faces and black hearts who want our blood, and they will not see your kindness as mercy, they will see it as betrayal." The riders turned, mounting again in a single motion that looked like wind catching wings. Nayli looked back once, her eyes finding Ethan's. No words passed, only that silent promise, carried across the fading light. Then they were gone, melting into the desert like ghosts returning to the land. Ethan stood alone once more, the obsidian knife heavy in his hand, the pendant warm against his chest. The sky deepened into night. The first star rose, and in that quiet he knew whatever peace had been born here would not last. The river had taken one life and spared another, but now it was carrying a message far stronger than either. War was coming, and mercy had a price. The next morning broke with the dull orange of dust storms far to the east, painting the sky like a bruise. Dust Creek woke uneasy. The blacksmith's hammer struck slower, the saloon stayed half empty, and every man who passed Ethan on the street looked at him with the same question burning in their eyes. What did he bring back from the river? Ethan saddled his horse outside the livery, his movements calm but deliberate. He had the obsidian knife tucked inside his coat, the eagle pendant against his chest, and the feeling that every sound around him was sharper than usual, like the world itself was holding its breath. Sheriff Tully found him just as he was tightening the saddle strap. "Walker," he said flatly, "we need to talk." Ethan didn't look up. "Talkin's all anyone's been doin', Sheriff." Tully's boots scuffed the dirt as he stopped beside him. "Word from the fort just came in. They're sendin' a patrol this way," said the Apache been seen near the Red River again. "They're common armed." Ethan's hand froze on the reins. They shouldn't be. Tully crossed his arms. "Tell that to the colonel. He thinks they're preparin' to strike. Says the tribe's got new riders, young ones. He's spooked, Ethan, and when the army gets spooked, they start a war they can't finish." Ethan said, voice low. The sheriff sighed, his tone somewhere between warning and regret. "You got anything you ain't told me, now's the time. That necklace, that knife. They mean something, don't they?" Ethan met his gaze. "They mean I saved a life, that's all." Tully stared at him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "You're a stubborn son of a gun, fine, but when them soldiers ride in you keep your head down. I ain't lossin' this town over somethin' you stirred up tryin' to be righteous." Ethan swung into the saddle. "Wasn't tryin' to be righteous, Sheriff, just human." He rode out before Tully could answer. The town shrank behind him, swallowed by the heat and dust, until all that was left was the endless sprawl of the frontier. Golden and cruelly quiet. The trail toward the Red River twisted between sandstone ridges. He rode fast, the wind whipping past his face, the rhythm of the horses' hooves echoing his pulse. The chief's words replayed in his head. There are men with white faces and black hearts. By the time he reached the river bend, he could already see signs. Tracks in the soft soil, campfire ash still warm, and a hawk feather wedged in the sand. The Apache had been there not long ago. He dismounted, crouched low, and touched the ground. Still fresh, a low rumble reached his ears then, distant at first, then clearer. The unmistakable beat of hooves, but it wasn't the Apache. It was soldiers. Through the haze, the U.S. Cavalry Patrol emerged, 5 men wide, dust trailing like smoke behind them. At their front rode Lieutenant Harris, young, sharp, and far too eager for a fight. He pulled up when he saw Ethan. "Walker, you're ridden alone out here. Dangerous territory for a civilian." Ethan stood, brushing off his hands. "You're the one bringin' danger, Lieutenant. There's no war here, unless you make one." Harris smirked, tapping the butt of his rifle. "You been talking to the natives again, cowboy? Folks say you're friendly with them." Ethan's tone hardened. "I talk to people. That ain't a crime. To some it is," Harris said coldly. "We've got orders to move east near the Apache Ridge. Any sign of hostiles, we shoot. Simple as that." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady but edged. "Those riders ain't hostile. They're guardin' their dead lands. If you cross that river with your guns high, you'll light a fire you can't put out." The lieutenant chuckled, motioning to his men. "You sound like one of them. Maybe you should wear paint next time." Ethan's jaw flexed, but he didn't rise to it. He knew the type, young, reckless, and too proud to hear the warnings of men who'd seen real war. He turned back toward his horse, muttering just loud enough, "When that fire comes, you'll remember I told you." He mounted and rode off, leaving the soldiers to their arrogance. Behind him, the sound of marching hooves faded, replaced by the wind whispering through the canyon, a warning only a few could still hear. And Ethan knew that before the next sunrise the Red River would not stay red from clay alone. The air changed before the earth did. The wind dropped low and slow, like something sacred was about to pass. Even the birds had gone silent. Ethan Walker stood at the ridge above his ranch and felt it in his bones before he saw it. Thunder without sound, a tremor running through the ground. Then, across the far plain, they appeared. 200 Apache warriors, mounted and painted for war. The horizon itself seemed to move, dark shapes rolling forward like a living storm. Feathers caught the sun, spears glinted like fire. The beat of their horses was steady and ancient, carrying the weight of generations behind it. Ethan didn't move. He just watched as they came closer, first as a shimmer, then as a force that filled the valley from one end to the other. Dust rose behind them, curling skyward like smoke from a battlefield long gone cold. At the center of that wave rode a single figure, larger than the rest. His shoulders were broad beneath a buffalo hide cloak. His face was carved with years of command, calm yet burning with pride. His hair, streaked with gray, was bound with eagle feathers that caught the light like blades. Gray Hawk, Nea's father, the war chief of the Apache nation. Ethan's heart beat slower, heavier. He'd heard stories of Gray Hawk since he was a boy, how he'd led men through dust storms and raids, how his eyes could measure the worth of a soul. But seeing him now, surrounded by his riders, was like watching a legend ride out of the earth itself. He could have run. He could have hidden in the canyon and let whatever was coming pass him by. But instead, Ethan did what men like him always did. He stayed. He took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and walked down into the open field, step after step until he stood alone, unarmed, exposed beneath the wide sky. The warriors slowed as they neared, their formation shifting into a crescent half, circle of muscle, hide, and silence. The sound of horses breathing filled the air, deep and steady. Grey Hawk halted 10 yards away, his horse's mane tossing like fire in the light. The chief stared at the man who stood before him, the pale rancher who had pulled his daughter from the flood. Ethan bowed his head slightly. "She's alive," he said quietly. "She's safe." For a long moment there was nothing. Then, from the center of the line, Nair rode forward. She looked like something reborn, stronger than before, scars lit by the sun, her dark hair braided with white river shells. She dismounted slowly, her eyes never leaving her father's. Grey Hawk dismounted too. He stood still, his shadow falling across the ground between them. Then he placed his hand against her shoulder. The silence broke, not with sound, but with the weight of what it meant. The daughter returned, the storm paused. The old wound between two worlds waited for its healing or its reopening. Then Grey Hawk turned his gaze on Ethan. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but carried the force of command. "You are the one they call Walker." Ethan nodded once. "Yes, sir. You took my daughter from the river. I pulled her out." Ethan said, "Did what any man ought to do." The chief studied him with eyes like flint. "Most men would have left her." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The land itself seemed to answer for him, whispering with the wind that still carried the scent of smoke from his burned ranch. Grey Hawk stepped closer, his boots crushing the dry grass. "There are few who show mercy to my people, fewer still who do it without wanting something in return." Ethan's voice held steady, didn't do it for reward, just couldn't let her drown. Grey Hawk's gaze flicked to the river in the distance, still swollen and restless from the storms. Then he looked back at Ethan. "My scouts say soldiers ride this way." "They do," Ethan said, 5 of them young, nervous, armed to the teeth. The chief's expression hardened. "They seek blood. They seek fear," Ethan said softly, "and they'll find it if we let them." For a long time no one spoke. The Apache riders shifted restlessly, their horses snorting in the hot air. The tension between two nations, one old, one young, hung suspended, thin as a breath. Then Naya stepped forward, her voice cutting through the heat. "Father," she said, "this man fought beside me. When Broken Crow's men came, he stood his ground. He burned his own barns to drive them off." A murmur rippled through the riders. Even Grey Hawk's jaw tensed at the name. Broken Crow. His rival, his shadow. Grey Hawk turned slowly toward her. "You trust him with my life," Anea said. The chief's eyes went back to Ethan. "Whatever storm had lived there softened, if only by a fraction, then he will ride with us," he said at last, "until I know which way the wind truly blows." Ethan's brows furrowed slightly. "Ride with you?" Grey Hawk nodded once. "You have walked between two fires. You will help decide which one burns first." The old man mounted again, raising his hand. The entire army followed suit in perfect motion. An ocean of hooves and dust rising once more. Naya mounted beside her father, glancing back at Ethan. "Come," she said, "the council will gather tonight." Ethan looked back at his ranch, charred fences, empty fields, the ghosts of all he'd built. Then he turned his horse toward the plains. As they rode out together, the setting sun cast their shadows long across the ground. Behind them, the red river shimmered in the distance, quiet and watchful, like it knew it would soon run red again, but not from floodwater. And as the warriors disappeared into the gold horizon, the valley whispered the truth no man could deny. When mercy stands before power, only one can remain standing at dawn. Night fell heavy over the plains. The horizon burned with the last embers of daylight before surrendering to a starless dark. 1,000 fires began to bloom across the Apache encampment, each one glowing like a heartbeat against the black. The valley pulsed with murmurs, with the soft chant of drums far beyond sight, with the weight of something ancient stirring awake. Ethan rode in behind Naya and Grey Hawk, the 3 of them moving through rows of riders who stood like sentinels, silent and proud. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, pine, and sweat. Shadows of painted faces flickered in the firelight, their eyes watching him, not with hate, but with measure. They were weighing his soul. No white man had crossed into this camp and walked out again for decades. He knew that, and yet he felt no fear. only a strange calm, like the river's still water before a storm. The encampment sprawled beneath the mesa, hundreds of tents, their hides painted with stories older than the language he spoke. A circle had been cleared in the center, wide and flat, ringed with burning torches. It wasn't a place for battle. It was a place for judgment. Gray Hawk dismounted first. "Leave your weapon," he said. Ethan unbuckled his revolver and set it in the dust. "Don't plan on needing it." "You won't," Gray Hawk said quietly. "Not if your heart speaks truth." They walked side by side into the circle. Warriors gathered around them, a sea of feathers and faces reflecting the fire. The drums stopped. The world seemed to hold still. An old man stepped forward from the shadows. His back was bent, his hair white as ash. Around his neck hung bones carved with symbols, and in his hand was a staff made of cedar and copper. He was the tribe's spirit keeper, the one who remembered what men had forgotten. He looked at Ethan long and deep before speaking in the Apache tongue. His voice was gravel and wind. Naya translated softly beside him. "He says this circle is for truth, not for vengeance. He says your spirit will show itself by fire." Ethan nodded once, then let the fire see me. The spirit keeper stepped aside, and Gray Hawk came forward. His face was carved in stone, his eyes a storm waiting to break. "You saved my daughter," he said. "But you also brought war upon this valley. The soldiers move like snakes through the canyons, their rifles thirsty, and Broken Crow. He waits for their clash to light the plains in blood. Tell me, rancher, why should my people not cast you into the dark where your kind belongs?" Ethan's voice was steady, carrying in the stillness. "Because your enemy ain't me. It's the men who want this land soaked in fear. I didn't start the flood, Chief. I just pulled one soul from drownin'." Gray Hawk's jaw flexed. "And yet the flood rises higher." Ethan looked around the circle, at the faces, the fire, the old ones in silence. "Maybe, but water don't choose where it runs. Men do. I can't undo what's been done between your kind and mine, but I won't watch good people burn for what they didn't cause." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some eyes softened, others hardened. Naya stood tall beside him, her voice sharp and sure. "He speaks truth. I saw it. When the enemy came, he fought beside me. His blood spilled into our soil as if it were his own." The spirit keeper lifted his hand, motioning for quiet. He stepped forward with a bowl of burning herbs, the smoke rising thick and sweet. He waved it around Ethan, chanting low. The flames flickered higher, as though testing him. The smell of sage filled his lungs, and the heat pressed against his face like judgment. Then the old man dipped a glowing coal into the dust, drawing a circle at Ethan's feet. "He will stand in the fire's heart," Naya whispered. "If it burns blue, his spirit is false. If it burns red, the ancestors accept him." Ethan met her eyes, and if it burns black, she hesitated. "Then no man will speak your name again." The spirit keeper dropped the coal into the center. The flames licked upward, fierce and bright. Ethan didn't flinch. The crowd leaned closer. For a heartbeat the fire wavered uncertainly, then bloomed deep crimson, rich and strong. The red light washed across the faces of the warriors, across Naya's cheeks, across Gray Hawk's stern silence. The old man spoke again, voice rising like wind in canyon walls. Naya smiled faintly as she translated. "He says, the river spirit walks beside you. The ancestors know your mercy." Gray Hawk looked away, jaw tight. "Mercy doesn't win wars." Ethan turned toward him. "No, but it ends them." The chief's gaze flickered back to him, and for the first time something almost like respect crossed it. "Then you'll need to prove that before dawn." Ethan frowned slightly. "How?" Gray Hawk gestured toward the eastern ridge. "Broken Crow's men move there tonight. They carry torches. They mean to strike the soldiers before sunrise and blame us for the slaughter. If they succeed, every rifle in the territory will turn on my people." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we stop him." Gray Hawk's voice deepened. "Not we, you." The warriors stirred at that. Ethan stared at him. "You're sending me into their camp. You speak their tongue. They'll think you bring news from the soldiers. You will walk into the fire and snuff it out or burn in it. Ethan looked toward the black hills where faint orange flickers trembled against the stars. Guess there's worse ways to pay a debt. Nea's hand brushed his arm, a small, silent plea. If you go, they will kill you. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but if I don't, they'll kill 1,000 others. He turned toward the darkness, where the wind was already rising and the drums began again. Low, deep, ancient. Each beat followed him as he walked out of the circle into the night, toward the place where light and shadow waited to decide which kind of man he truly was. Night crept over the plains like ink spilling from the edge of the earth. The town of Dust Creek sat uneasy beneath it, lamps flickering, doors bolted, and whispers running like cold wind through every crack in the wood. By the time the moon rose, Ethan Walker knew peace was over. He sat alone at the edge of his barn, oiling his rifle in silence. Each click of metal was a promise not of violence, but of resolve. The Apache warning had echoed in his mind for days now. They will not see your kindness as mercy. And tonight he saw what that meant. From the far ridge, a line of riders approached under the moonlight. Their torches swayed like moving stars, their laughter cutting through the still air. Ranch hands, bounty seekers, and drunken men with something to prove, all drawn by one rumor. A cowboy was harboring Apache secrets. Ethan rose, rifle in hand. His breath came steady. The horse beside him shifted, sensing his stillness. Inside the barn, old Tom, the stable hand who'd worked for him since spring, spoke low. "Ethan, that's near 20 men out there." "I counted 23, Ethan said softly. "They ain't here to talk." Tom swallowed hard. "You gonna stand 'em down alone?" Ethan gave a faint grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Wouldn't be the first time." Out on the ridge, the lead rider, Jeb Carver, a man whose hatred burned hotter than his whiskey, reined in his horse and shouted down, "Walker, we know you've been ridden with the savages. Time to answer for it." The town's silence grew thick. No one moved. Even the coyotes held their cries. Ethan stepped into the moonlight, rifle resting on his shoulder. "You talk too loud for a man who ain't sure." Carver spat, his eyes wild. "We found tracks Apache boots right near your spread." "You think we're fools?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "They came in peace. They came to thank me, that's all." Carver barked a laugh. "Thank you. Ain't no peace with redskins. You should have shot him when you had the chance." The crowd behind him cheered, ugly and hungry. Tom muttered, "They're fixin' for blood, Ethan." Ethan nodded, stepping closer to the fence line. "Then I reckon I'll have to remind 'em this land don't belong to hate." He chambered around with one clean motion. The sound echoed across the ridge, crisp, cold, final. Carver sneered, "You really gonna stand there against all of us?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "No, Jeb." He cocked the rifle, leveling it at the leader's chest. "I'm gonna stand for what's right." The wind kicked up dust between them, horses snorted. Fingers twitched near triggers, and in that tense heartbeat before chaos, the first flash of lightning split the sky-white fire, cracking the dark. The storm had come, but not just the one above them, the one that had been building inside every man since the day Ethan pulled that woman from the river. As thunder rolled, the riders began to move. And Ethan Walker alone, outnumbered, yet unbroken, stepped forward to meet them, his shadow long and steady against the lightning's glare. The night was about to decide whose story would be remembered. The rain came hard and sudden, like the heavens had finally opened their fists. Dust Creek vanished under sheets of water, torches hissing out one by one, leaving only the silver flash of lightning to mark the faces of men who'd come to kill. Ethan Walker stood firm in the downpour, hat brim dripping, rifle steady in his grip. The mud beneath his boots churned as horses reared, and men cursed thunder, drowning their anger into a single, chaotic roar. "Carver," Ethan shouted through the storm, "you turn around now, and nobody has to bleed tonight." But Jeb Carver's laugh came sharp and bitter through the rain. "Too late for talk, Walker. You chose your side when you saved that savage girl. The mob moved closer, boots splashing, guns drawn. Lightning streaked across their faces, twisted with hate, wet with fury. Ethan's heart pounded steady, not with fear, but with the calm that comes to a man who's already made peace with the worst that can happen. He sighted his rifle low, aiming at the ground near Carver's horse. One warning shot cracked the night. The bullet hit the dirt inches from the man's stirrup, spraying mud across his coat. The horse reared, screaming, and threw him to the ground. That stopped them for a second. Next one won't miss, Ethan said, voice level, rain running down his face like steel tears. Behind him, the barn door creaked open. Old Tom stepped out, holding his shotgun tight against his chest. "You ain't standing alone, boy," he muttered. Ethan didn't turn. "Tom, you shouldn't. I'm too old to run and too mean to hide," Tom said, cutting him off. "Ain't letting them burn what we built." From the ridge, another voice cut through the wind, deep, calm, and commanding. Walker, Ethan froze. That voice wasn't one of the mob. It was too strong, too steady, and then he saw them shadows on the horizon, riding fast and silent. Dozens of them. War paint gleaming beneath the lightning. Feathers whipping in the storm, it was the Apache. They had come back. At their lead rode Chief Taza, his spear raised high, thunder glinting off the blade. Beside him, Naley, her hair braided tight, bow in hand, eyes locked on the chaos below. The mob turned, stunned. Some stepped back, some reached for their guns, but before any could fire, a single war cry split the rain. It was not a cry of rage. It was a cry of warning. Taza shouted in English now, voice booming across the storm, "No man crosses this line. No blood will touch this land tonight." The lightning flared again, showing every face. The Apaches on one side, the mob on the other, and Ethan standing between them, soaked to the bone, unflinching. For a moment even nature seemed to hold its breath. Ethan lowered his rifle, stepping forward into the space between both sides. "This ends here," he said, his voice raw but clear. "We all bled enough from hate. Ain't no one walking away clean if this fight starts." Carver, still on one knee, spat mud and snarled. "You're a fool, Walker. They'll turn on you next." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the chief, calm, steady, maybe, but I'd rather fall beside an honest man than stand with a coward. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The men behind Carver shifted, uncertain. Some lowered their guns. The storm wasn't just in the sky anymore, it was in their hearts, cracking the ground between hate and reason. Ethan could feel it, the turning point. The breath before either peace or war. For a heartbeat, the world stood still, thunder rumbling like drums of fate, lightning flickering across the soaked plains. Both sides stared at each other, breath steaming, fingers trembling near triggers. Ethan Walker stood in the center, his hat dripping, his rifle lowered but ready. He looked from the mob to the Apache riders, his voice calm but heavy with warning. "Anybody fires a shot tonight, this whole valley'll drown in blood before the sun comes up." No one answered. The rain hammered down harder, blurring the line between mud and man. Jeb Carver pushed himself to his feet, soaked and shaking with rage. "You think you can stand between us and them, Walker?" he snarled. "You've forgotten what they done to our kind." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Ain't about kind, Jeb. It's about right and wrong. You come here for hate, I'm standin' for peace." Carver raised his revolver, eyes wild. "Then you'll die with them." Before the gun could lift, a sharp whistle cut through the rain. The sound was followed by a streak of motion, an Apache arrow that struck the ground inches from Carver's boot, quivering in the mud. Every man froze. Chief Taza rode forward, spear raised, his voice carrying over the storm. "Enough. This land's seen too much death. One more drop, and it belongs to ghosts." Carver's lip curled. "You think you scare me, savage." Taza's eyes narrowed. "No, but your fear of truth already does." The tension snapped like a stretched wire. Carver lunged to fire. Ethan saw it coming, the flash, the motion, the madness. He dove sideways, the shot grazing his sleeve. In the same breath, his rifle came up not at Carver's chest, but the revolver in his hand. The bullet struck metal, spinning the gun into the mud. The mob staggered back, stunned. Ethan rose slow, chest heaving, water pouring from his hat brim. "Go home, Jeb," he said, voice low and steady. "You got your pride. Leave with that before it's taken from you too." Carver looked around, saw his men's faces, their courage washed out by fear and shame. No one lifted a gun, not one. His shoulders sagged. With a grunt he turned, trudging toward his horse. The others followed, silent, heads down, vanishing into the storm like ghosts of their own guilt. Only when their torches disappeared beyond the ridge did Ethan lower his rifle. The rain softened, the thunder rolled away, and from across the riverbank Chief Taza rode closer. He dismounted, stepping through the mud until he stood before Ethan. For a long moment neither spoke. Then the chief extended his hand. "You stood between hate and death." Taza said quietly, "Few men do." Ethan hesitated, then took the hand. Their grips were firm, unbroken. "Did what I had to," Ethan replied, "same as any man should." From behind, Nayli approached, her face calm beneath the rain. Her eyes met Ethan's soft, grateful, proud. She spoke in her language, and Taza translated. "She says the river remembers kindness longer than war." Ethan gave a faint nod, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe the land's finally learnin' to forgive." Taza stepped back, raising his hand in farewell. The Apache riders turned and vanished into the fading storm, their silhouettes melting into the mist. Ethan watched until the last one disappeared. The only sound left was the rain easing into silence. Old Tom stepped out from the barn, his shotgun resting against his shoulder. "Well," he muttered, "you reckon they'll come back." Ethan looked to the horizon, the faintest glow of dawn breaking through dark clouds. "Not them," he said softly, "but trouble always." He holstered his rifle, water dripping from his coat, and turned toward the barn. Behind him, the river shimmered faintly in the first light of morning, peaceful now, almost as if the land itself had exhaled. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Walker smiled. The storm had passed. But the legend had just begun. Years passed like wind through the canyon, whispering, fading, returning again. The Red River, once swollen with blood and storm, now ran calm beneath the morning sun. Its banks were green, alive with cottonwood and laughter. The valley that had once trembled with gunfire now carried the voices of children, some with hair the color of wheat, others black as crow feathers, playing together in the same dust their fathers once fought upon. Ethan Walker sat on the porch of the rebuilt ranch, a mug of black coffee in his hand, watching the dawn stretch over the plains. His beard had turned silver, his shoulders slower to rise, but his eyes still held the quiet fire of a man who'd stood against death and lived to see peace grow from its ashes. Old Tom was gone now, buried up by the ridge. Under a stone Ethan had carved himself. A simple mark, no words. Tom never cared for them. The ranch hands who came after were younger, softer men who spoke of markets and rails instead of cattle and storms. But they worked honest, and that was enough. From across the river, smoke curled upward, not the kind of war fires Ethan once feared, but the gray, gentle smoke of morning meals. The Apache had settled their camps deeper into the valley's edge. Their horses grazed near his cattle, their songs drifted through the wind at night. Every so often, a rider would cross the river at sunset bringing herbs, carved wood, or word from Nayli. She had become something of a legend among her people. They called her River Sentinel, the woman who defied the flood and returned with peace in her hands. Ethan had not seen her in years. Yet in quiet hours he still heard her voice, soft as rain against the cabin roof, steady as the river itself. He wondered if she thought of him too, or if her world had finally carried her beyond the memories they shared. A young boy ran up from the corral Elijah, his hair sunburnt, his hands full of wildflowers. "Pa," he called, "look what I found near the river." Ethan turned, smiling faintly. The boy held a white feather, long and perfect, the tip dipped in red clay. His breath caught. He recognized it, the feather of the red hawk, worn only by the lineage of Chief Taza himself. "Where'd you find it, son?" Ethan asked softly. The boy pointed toward the river bend, where the water shimmered gold. "Stuck in the mud, like it was waitin' for me." Ethan rose slowly, setting his mug aside. His knees ached, but he didn't mind. He walked down toward the river, the boy following close behind. When he reached the edge, the breeze lifted the scent of sage and rain. He knelt, touching the damp earth where the feather had been. There, pressed faintly into the soil, was a print not of boot or hoof, but a bare human foot. He looked across the water. For a moment, maybe just a trick of the light, he saw her standing on the far bank. Tall still, her braided hair glinting with silver strands, her eyes steady as ever. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. The river between them said more than words ever could. Ethan took off his hat, holding it to his chest. The boy stood beside him, quiet now, feeling something he couldn't yet name, the weight of history breathing through the wind. The woman turned, walking back toward the trees. Within seconds, she vanished into the horizon as if swallowed by the morning light. Ethan smiled, slow and tired, but full of peace. "She's still watchin'," he whispered. The boy looked up. "Who, Pa?" "The river." Ethan answered, his eyes soft. "And everything it remembers." The sun climbed higher, spilling light over the valley. It touched the graves, the grass, the river, the wounds of the land now healed into scars that no longer hurt. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt no weight in his chest, only gratitude for storms survived, for enemies forgiven, for the river that never stopped flowing. He placed the feather behind his son's ear, his voice low. "Keep it close, boy. Someday you'll understand what it means." The boy nodded, beaming. Ethan rose again, looking out toward the endless horizon, where the sky burned gold and the earth whispered its old songs. The river flowed on quiet, eternal, remembering everything. Evening fell like an old friend returning home. The sky, painted in bruised gold and fading crimson, bled its last light across the valley. Crickets began their song, soft and steady, as smoke curled lazily from the cabin chimney. Ethan sat by the fence, watching the herd settle under the coming night. His hat rested on his knee, his gray hair catching the glow of the setting sun. The boy had gone inside with his mother, the laughter of family life echoing faintly through the wooden walls, the kind of peace Ethan once thought would never return to this land. The wind carried the faint hum of drums from across the river, not the drums of war, but of remembrance. The Apache were holding their moon ceremony, honoring those who had passed into the spirit world. Ethan closed his eyes and listened. Each beat was a heartbeat of the land itself, steady, patient, ancient. He thought of all who had gone before. Old Tom, Chief Taza, even the nameless ranchers and warriors who fell to rage and misunderstanding. And he thought of Naili, the woman who had crossed a river of death and, in doing so, washed hate from the stones of time. The river glimmered silver in the twilight like a living thing. He rose slowly, walked toward it once more, boots crunching through the dry grass. When he reached the bank, he could see the reflection of the stars beginning to shimmer on the surface, the same stars that once watched him fight for his life, and now watched him stand in quiet peace. He knelt and dipped his hand into the cool current. The water flowed around his fingers, soft and endless. "You remember, don't you?" he murmured. The river said nothing, but its gentle ripples spoke in their own way, a whisper carried through time. A feather floated by, not white this time, but dark, glistening like oil in moonlight. Ethan caught it gently, turned it between his fingers. He smiled faintly. "Still watchin', huh?" He tucked it into the band of his hat, stood tall once more, and looked out over the plains. The land stretched endless and free, no walls, no borders, no battles, just sky and wind and earth learning at last to exist together. Behind him his son's voice called out from the cabin door, "Pa, Ma says supper's ready." Ethan turned, his smile widening. "I'm comin', boy." He took one last look at the river, at the water winding through the dark like a silver road to eternity. As he turned away, the wind stirred, carrying faint laughter, faint singing, faint echoes of a woman's voice. It came from the water, or maybe from the stars, or maybe from the part of his soul that would never forget. He paused at the door, looking back just once more, and said softly to her, to the land, "To time itself I kept my promise." Then he stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The night deepened, the stars burned bright. and the river kept on flowing, carrying the memories of mercy, the weight of forgiveness, and the story of a man who once saved a giant Apache woman and changed two worlds forever. Epilogue: The Whispering Horizon. Years later, when Ethan was long gone and his son had grown into a man, children from both sides, settlers and Apache alike, played by that same river. They found an old wooden cross near the bend, weathered but strong. Tied to it were two feathers, one white, one black, bound together by a strip of faded leather. The wind made them dance softly against each other, whispering in rhythm with the river's flow. And if you listened closely in the hush between water and wind, you could almost hear a voice, deep, calm, eternal, saying, "Mercy outlives the sword,